The fall of the Templo Mayor, a grand ceremonial pyramid at the heart of the Aztec capital, stripped of the pious trappings of Christian conquest and viewed through the unvarnished lens of human history, stands as a profoundly good thing, a long overdue reckoning for a regime built on terror, subjugation, and the ritualized murder of thousands. To celebrate the destruction of such a monument is not to merely align with the victors, the Spanish conquistadors, whose motives were as imperialistic and self-serving as any in history. Rather, it is to recognize that the obliteration of the Templo Mayor marked the end of one of the most grotesque systems of human sacrifice ever devised. Let's set aside for a moment the usual narrative of the noble savage that romanticized Rousseauian fantasy of indigenous societies living in perfect harmony with nature and each other until the arrival of the white man. The Aztec civilization centered around the Templo Mayor was a brutal and blood-soaked theocracy where the lives of human beings, often captives, slaves, and those from conquered peoples, were treated as little more than fuel for the empire's insatiable hunger for power and cosmic appeasement. This was not the voluntary self-sacrifice of an individual in the service of a higher cause, as might be found in some religious traditions. No, this was state-sponsored mass murder carried out on an industrial scale, to placate deities whose demands for blood were as endless as they were arbitrary. The Templo Mayor, towering over Tenochtitlan, was the epicenter of this horror, a place where hearts were torn from chests, heads lopped off, and bodies cast down the steep steps in rivers of blood. It was, in every sense, a factory of death. And the fall of such a place, therefore, should be seen not as the tragic loss of cultural heritage, but as the liberation of countless souls, living and dead, from the tyranny of a barbaric and inhumane system. The destruction of the Templo Mayor was not merely a military victory, it was a moral one. It was the dismantling of a regime that had long forfeited any claim to nobility or virtue by its relentless pursuit of power through terror. Imagine, if you will, the perspective of those countless victims, many of whom were not Aztecs but members of subjugated tribes, forced to march to Tenochtitlan to be slaughtered in a ritual they did not believe in, for gods they did not worship, by a people who saw them as little more than cattle. For these individuals, the fall of the Templo Mayor was not just the end of their captors' dominance, but a cosmic moment of justice, a turning of the wheel, where the blood-soaked altar of their torment was reduced to ruins. Even if we strip away the Christian veneer through which the Spanish conquistadors justified their actions, we are still left with the undeniable reality that the Templo Mayor's fall was an end to the most grotesque practices of human sacrifice in the pre-Columbian Americas. The end of the Templo Mayor was the end of a place where human life was systematically devalued and destroyed to uphold the power of a ruling class. It was the end of a system that enslaved and murdered in the name of divine mandate, and the erasure of a monument that stood not for the glory of a civilization, but for its most heinous crimes. It is, of course, necessary to acknowledge the horrors that followed the fall of Tenochtitlan, the enslavement, the disease, the forced conversions, and the destruction of indigenous cultures at the hands of the Spanish. But these atrocities do not negate the fundamental truth that the destruction of the Templo Mayor was, in itself, a profoundly good thing. It was the toppling of a symbol of despotism, a monument to a regime that maintained its power through the relentless shedding of innocent blood. The fall of the Templo Mayor should be remembered not with sorrow for what was lost, but with a recognition of the countless lives that were spared the blade because the temple was brought down. It was a moment of historical necessity, where the moral calculus of human civilization shifted, however briefly, in favor of life over death and freedom over theocratic tyranny. Let us then, in our remembrance of the Templo Mayor's fall, not mourn the loss of a temple, but celebrate the end of an atrocity. For in the ruins of that blood-stained pyramid, we find not the remnants of a great civilization, but the ashes of a monstrous cruelty that was, at last, consigned to history's darkest annals, where it belonged.